All right, well, let's talk about one of the issues that has caused so much consternation in the House and amongst politicians, which is the customs union. Without going over the various options, or the two particular options on the table, would you accept, Jacob Rees-Mogg, which is being talked about and tweeted actually by one of your colleagues, Nick Bowles, an extension to staying in the customs union with the EU beyond the transition period to put in place the sort of arrangements that may then make it possible to have a technological answer to coming out?
It's very hard to see that this would be necessary.
But would you support it if it was offered?
Well, I don't think it's necessary. I think that we voted to leave in 2016. We're now talking about extending the customs union until 2023. That is 7 years. The wheels may grind and slow, but this is an exceptionally slow grinding. I think the implementation period to the end of 2020 is quite sufficient.
But HMRC came before the Treasury Select Committee and said that even before the changes they will need to make for whatever the customs arrangement is going to be, which we don't yet know, the government haven't yet said what it's going to be, they were undertaking the biggest change programme in Europe already. And I think the expectations that the government have of them just look like they can't practically be met. Now, I would have my own argument about the mishandling of, you know, what the Brexit negotiating position was, but the fact is we can't just like leave businesses to it. We can't just like sort of throw them in it and say, well, you'll just have to cope with whatever it is. That's just not fair to people in the British economy.
But would it be an acceptable compromise to you, Jacob Rees-Mogg, to stay in the customs union as is because of the changes that Alison McGovern say will be very difficult for businesses, and then move to what they call maximum facilitation, which is this technological solution if it were to work and solve the Northern Ireland?
HMRC is introducing a new computer system for customs declarations, which it said clearly in evidence in front of select committees it was confident but couldn't guarantee because of the nature of all new.
I was in those sessions, and I can promise you.
I was in sessions with them too.
That was absolutely not the impression that we were given.
The volume that they can do with their new system will include customs declarations on goods coming from the European Union.
All right.
And it's just a question of having the will and the desire and the focus.
There's 130,000. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Jacob, but this is really important. There's 130,000 businesses in this country that will need to do customs declaration that currently don't, and you know, because of the EU, are likely never to have done one. I'm really concerned about them. A lot of small and medium-sized enterprises in this country, and I don't think the noise coming out of the Brexiteers at this moment is realistic.
You're being unrealistic. You're putting down red lines that are actually making it difficult to reach a solution.
I don't think that's right. I think we've already been very full of compromise, that we have accepted the transition period, we've accepted an extension of 21 months.
And will you accept a compromise over the customs union?
The customs union means we're effectively staying in the European Union.
So no.
So no, of course not. Of course I won't accept.
So that is a red line. Any extension, any remaining in it.
That we stay in the customs union would be an extension of membership of the European Union and would be a dramatic failure of government policy. As David Davis said in evidence to the Brexit Select Committee, he said if we stayed in the customs union a day beyond the 31st of December 2020, he would view it as a personal failure.
Right. What will you do if Theresa May says that's the only option? That's the only way, if you look at the makeup of the House of Commons. We've obviously had all these defeats in the House of Lords. Even the Cabinet is balanced towards the option that you don't like, the customs partnership. Do you not just have to compromise further on the customs union?
The government got elected on a manifesto saying we would leave the customs union. Theresa May reiterated this in an article.
It was a hung parliament.
Hold on. Well, the government is the government, and unless it loses a vote of confidence in the House of Commons, it is the government, and its policy is what the Prime Minister is committed to implementing.
Will it end up as a vote of confidence then over
nodding
this?
Whilst I say that.
Will it end up as a vote of confidence over this? Are you prepared to go that far?
Hold on. The Prime Minister wrote an article for The Sun on Sunday just last weekend saying that she was going to leave the single market and the customs union. I trust the Prime Minister to do what she says she will do.
One of her preferred options is the customs partnership, which you've rejected.
The customs union partnership seems to be running into the sand, because the issue with
according to Greg Clark, the business secretary.
Well, that was on Sunday, and we've had further developments. That seems to be running into the sand because it practically doesn't work. And it's perfectly reasonable for the government to examine options and then conclude that the option doesn't work.
Yeah, but I would just like to hear an option that could work, because, you know, this idea of technology, I'm afraid, doesn't deal with the issues on the island of Ireland. The border is incredibly sensitive and complex, And it's much more than, you know, whether you have physical infrastructure. It's about checks and, you know, processes that will be targets, and where people feel they've had an identity where they've been able to look either way on the island of Ireland. And that's a very important part of the Good Friday Agreement that has to be protected.
When is Theresa May going to have to make up her mind on this?
Well, the negotiations are taking place as we speak.
Sure, but time,
would hope to
I hate to quote Michel Barnier in that way, but time is running out.
Time flies, yes, as a little boy said when he threw the clock out of the window. But the idea is there will be an outline by the end of October.
Right, but but we've got to get on to some sort of trade talks by then. I mean, in terms of the customs union, when is the decision?
We have to get it through the European Parliament.
Right, I mean,
this is the essential part of the trade, is the customs issue. And with the Northern Irish border, there are already checks. It is a border for currency, it is a border for immigration, it is a border for excise, and it is a border for VAT.
Right.
So you're just adding one more thing for which it is a border. That does not need a hard border or physical infrastructure.
Let's just talk about
adding in that sentence.
One of the things that we haven't talked about are food prices, because you think that food prices will come down when we leave the EU. You don't think they will. And in fact, the Lords subcommittee, your favourite house, reported on trade post-Brexit and said an average 22% tariff would be put on food with price rises at the checkout, which wouldn't help the poorest in society, would it, Jacob?
Well, the House of Lords has missed one very important thing, and that is that if you are in a negotiation for a free trade agreement, you can maintain your existing standards for 10 years under WTO rules. So we have 10 years from the point at which we leave the European Union to negotiate a free trade agreement with the EU, which would mean we could carry on with our zero tariffs. So this is something the report just ignores. It's unaware of, and I'm afraid,
I mean, surely it hasn't ignored. Well, surely it hasn't ignored it. They know what they're talking about.
No, they don't, unfortunately. I've read the report. It's got no reference to this WTO rule.
Are they Remainers as well? Is this a conspiracy?
Well, the chairman of the committee is a former member of the European Parliament, so it's a fairly safe bet that he's Remainer. But let's look at page 27.
UKIP had members of the European Parliament, so that's hardly fair.
But let's look at page 27. Current retail prices for sirloin steak in the US is £12.67 per kilogramme, and in the UK is £22.06 per kilogramme. If we import for them in the US, we can almost halve the price of beef.
Well, let's all go out and eat sirloin steak.
Jacob might be worried about
Alison
people
McGovern
who can eat steak. I'm worried about the 1 in 5 people in this country who are already facing food insecurity. We've had an explosion of food banks, and it's not just tariffs, Jacob. It's also putting rocks in the road of the trade that happens to produce food on a daily basis.
This is really important.
But that's what Jacob's suggesting. It's the non-tariff barriers. It's the bureaucracy that would be adding in to the food industry. That's what I'm worried about.
But this is voluntary. Why would a British government want to make importing food harder? It can make it easier. It can reduce the price of tariffs by 22%. It can have free trade. And it can say that all the food produced in the EU, whose standards we accepted up until the 29th of March 2019, is still of a good enough standard to come into the UK. So what this report is saying is that a British government, as an act of self-harm, would put up prices for the British people. This is madness.
Final word to you.
There is absolutely no evidence that unilateral trade measures are good for free trade. There is no evidence at all. This is what all the Brexiteers say. Actually, multilateral trade agreements are what facilitates trade. That is what the EU single market is, and that's how we keep food prices affordable in this country.
All right, thank you both for coming in and bringing in the Lord's report.
Well, I always do my homework before coming in.
That's why we invite you. Thank you.